Okay, so chapter 6 ended on a relatively positive note, with Victor and Clerval heading home to Geneva. However, this is English class and we don't deal with happiness, so chapter 7 begins with another letter, this time from Victor's father, Alphonse, delivering the terrible news that young William Frankenstein has been murdered. If you remember the description of William that Shelley provided in the last chapter, the symbolism is clear. He was described as an angelic innocent, so clearly his death is meant to reflect that, as well as emphasize the evil and horror of it. This is echoed in the description of the terrible storm that greets Victor upon his arrival into his home country, echoing the chaos that Victor has created and brought with him. Shelley pumps up the use of the imagery we often associate with the horror genre, using the word violent a couple of times to describe it, but she also shows Victor's awe at the power of nature, the nature that he tried so hard to overcome. And then we are given a scene that has since become a cliche of the horror genre, that of the monstrous silhouettes in a storm, as Victor views from afar what we, the audience, know to be the creature. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me, its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. The creature lives, and Victor is certain that he is responsible for William's murder. Now, it's important to note Victor's reaction to all of this, namely that he seems to be making all of this about him, and not necessarily in a good way. He accepts responsibility for the creation of the creature, and rightly so, but takes none of the responsibility for how the creature has come to this murderous point. Whether or not he should have to take responsibility is of course open for a thematic debate, as it ties into that age-old question of nature versus nurture, and both characters will struggle with this very shortly. But it gets to the root of one of Shelley's themes: are humans innately good or evil, and what makes them as such? When Victor is told by Ernest that they have caught the murderer, he immediately assumes that they mean the creature, and what that might mean for him. But shockingly, it seems that it is in fact Justine Moritz who stands accused. Now, to Victor's credit, he tells them all that Justine is innocent. However, he neglects to mention who/what is. He keeps the identity to himself, rationalizing that 1. There's no real evidence to convict Justine, so she'll be let go, and 2. No one would believe his story. Think back to how Victor felt at having to potentially explain to Clerval what he had done, and we see that same guilt and shame now. Victor wanted to play God and achieve glory, but now cannot bear for anyone to know the truth. The hypocrisy is clear, but also all too relatable. We've all had those moments that we don't ever want anyone else to discover. For all his faults, Victor is very much a reflection of us as well, and all the negative connotations that implies. Chapter 8 details Justine's trial, but it also further shows us that Victor is perhaps feeling sorry for the wrong person in all of this. He describes the anguish and torment that he felt at the fact that William had been murdered and Justine accused because of his actions, and how he can't even come to her defense, because even though 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime ascribed to Justine, but I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exculpated her who suffered through me. This also goes back to the problematic sexism in Shelley's depiction of women in the story, how they are made to suffer through and in fact seemingly be used as a way of developing male characters. Again, this is a very debatable theme, so build your own thoughts and opinions on it. Regardless, while Victor's rationale isn't entirely wrong, it's also pretty lame, as far as excuses for not saving someone go. Shelley further reiterates the sheer hubris and self-centeredness of Victor when he later declares how the tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. Sure, Victor, sure. Sadly, the whole point is moot, as Justine inexplicably confesses. Essentially, she was threatened with her soul's damnation if she didn't confess, so she did. And again, unfortunately, we see these types of coerced confessions even to this day. And even more terribly, we see this in the institution of victim blaming and shaming, especially when it comes to women. Regardless, the suffering of the female characters simply to further Victor's development is still problematic. Chapter 9 is a quick one, used to detail the suffering of the Frankenstein household, namely that of Alphonse, Elizabeth, and of course, most importantly of course, Victor. The beginning of chapter 10 continues this theme of the beauty and power of nature, something Shelley's been pretty clear on since the beginning, as Victor admits how these sublime and magnificent scenes elevated me from all the littleness of feeling, and although they did not remove my grief, they subdued and tranquilized it. Despite his mistakes and arrogance, we can still empathize with Victor in this regard. Keep this in mind for later. Victor's introspection continues as he muses on the curse of consciousness that humans possess. Shelley inserts lines from a poem her husband Percy wrote, titled Mutability, recapping the theme of it in the preceding paragraph when Victor questions, "Why does man boast the sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute? It only renders them more necessary beings. If our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, we might nearly be free. But now we are moved by every wind that blows and a chance word or scene that word may convey to us." This is not a new philosophical dilemma, this idea that humanity would be happier without the power of our minds. After all, Victor himself has admitted that his own curiosity led him to play God, and that's ruined lives. Philosophers have long debated this idea of the state of nature, which from certain perspectives deals with how humanity has and could behave outside of human creations such as governments and societies. Again, the whole nature versus nurture question, which Shelley will be going very deeply into quite soon. In any case, we finally get the return of the creature as he parkours over the glacier to confront his maker. However, we aren't greeted by a hulking, inarticulate brute, but rather a hulking and incredibly well-spoken creature, demanding that Victor fulfill his obligations as his creator. Victor gets mad and tries to attack the creature, which is just as pathetic as it sounds, and the creature reminds him of this. It is at this point in the story that Shelley is going to begin to really delve into the deeper philosophical quandaries of humanity, and the creature articulates this in several well-written lines. When she has him say that life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it, and remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Shelley is asking us, the reader, to question innocence, the nature of good and evil, and the meaning of life, really swinging for the fences with her first novel. This portrayal of the creature is in stark contrast to many of the versions we see in popular culture today. The reason for this is that it's a lot easier to view the creature as a simple, dumb monster. By having him speak and think just as well as Victor, Shelley is going to force the reader to at least attempt to view things from his point of view. We need to see him as more than just a monster, but as a living, thinking, and feeling being. This is what he asks of Victor, who admits to himself that it is the least he can do as his creator, and we begin the next layer of the story as the narration switches to the creature. Now, remember way back when we looked at how Walton's frame narrative led into Victor's story, which added thematic depth to that story? We see that again with the creature's tale, and how Shelley is using the three distinct narrators as a way of both narrowing and expanding the themes of the novel. Think of it like this. Walton's narrative sets the stage. Much like him, we the readers are coming into this relatively blind with our own ideas and conceptions on our goals and how things should go with this story. This is the outer level, where we're getting a relatively shallow introduction to the ideas and themes such as loneliness, the pursuit of knowledge, things like that. We then move into Victor's story, which opened things up thematically. We are now treated to the reasons behind these questions and possibly explanations as to their importance to the human experience. A fascination with science and nature, as well as the loss of a dear loved one, lead him on a quest to discover and conquer the secrets of life, which ultimately leads to more tragedy. And now we get the creature's tale, and as we will see, Shelley is going to be asking the big questions through him. The creature is almost literally a blank slate, created with a fully formed physical body and no natural biological connection to the birthing process as we know it. We are now going to see what it is that creates a human being. Is it biology or experience, nature or nurture? And what exactly does it mean to be truly human? This is where chapter 11 begins, literally moments after the creature's birth, as he takes his first steps into life, and Shelley takes great pains to use very specific imagery in this description, starting with the creature's first exposure to light, much like a newborn, and the fear he feels being alone in the darkened forest. We also see his amazement at the moon, and can't help but feel a little bit of sympathy for his childlike wonder as he marvels at the sounds of birds singing. Don't forget, however, that this is a child murderer, which adds an extra layer of complexity to what Shelley is doing. Another key image that Shelley uses is the creature's discovery of fire. He describes how he was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. There are a couple layers to this, and the first harkens back to the subtitle of the novel, The Modern Prometheus. Now, Victor is clearly the Prometheus of the story, as he is the one who has brought new and dangerous knowledge to humanity, which can and has been used for both good and ill. It can also be argued that the mastery of fire was when humanity took the first steps from the animal world towards civilization, and we can see that with the creature, as he learns how to make his own as well as how to cook his food. Going along with this, and perhaps more significantly, there is the paradox of fire, as the creature discovers. It warms, brightens, and protects, but also burns, terrifies, and destroys. Just like Victor, the creature, and more importantly, all of us. There exists within us all the ability to create and destroy, and both Victor and the creature have learned this. That being said, there is the moment when the creature sees his first humans apart from Victor. First the old man and then the villagers, who run and attack him. Now remember that the creature has no idea why these people are reacting this way. All he knows is that any time that he's seen these strange beings, they attack and hurt him. His experience with humanity is in direct contrast with how Victor described his own childhood. Whereas Victor was loved and cared for, the creature is brutalized and feared. Here, we begin to see Shelley's view on the state of humanity. That perhaps we are all born pure and innocent, and that it is only through our experience with the world that we become monsters. Debatable, but it is a crucial theme, so consider it. Eventually, the creature comes to the most important location of his young life, because remember, he's literally only a few days old. The cottage, belonging to the family we will come to know as the de Lacys. Taking refuge in their shed, as he has already learned to fear the reactions of others, the creature experiences a paradox similar to that of the fire, human emotions. His observations stir feelings of his own that he can't understand, such as when he describes, "I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food, and I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions." He feels the love within the cottage, but a part of him also knows that it is something that he has never experienced, creating a conflict of emotions. The creature still has a lot to learn about humanity. Chapter 12 continues the creature's education as he creeps on the family through the walls of his hovel. However, that education is surprisingly extensive as he learns about the nature of poverty and realizes that this is the source of the sadness that he observes. He also learns about kindness, something that he had until then absolutely no experience with. He learns this so well that as soon as he realizes that his stealing food causes the family to go hungry, he feels immediate regret and does his best to atone by gathering firewood. This is very interesting, as it seems that Shelley is reinforcing her thesis on humanity, that we are born good and only learn cruelty later, as the creature's first inclination is towards kindness. By doing this, Shelley is creating a conflict within the reader. This creature is a literal abomination against nature, and yet somehow he is now equally as kind and as pure as Elizabeth. It's an interesting thought, because clearly we've seen how he ends up. We also see where he learns how to speak, as he begins mimicking their sounds just as well as we do. Sadly, we also see as he discovers his appearance for the first time and begins to understand why he was so feared. As he tells Victor, "I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool, and when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification." This is incredibly sad, and again something that we still struggle with to this day. The comparisons and the standards that we as a society have created for ourselves, and the connection that we mistakenly make between physical beauty and morality. We saw it with Victor's immediate rejection of the creature, and we see it as the creature rejects himself. Again, it seems like Shelley is trying to show how our inner goodness is corrupted by societal standards and beliefs, and right now it's tough to argue with her. Possibly for this reason, the creature tries to learn everything that he can about the cottagers, especially how to speak, and he picks it up quite well with an incredible air of poetry to it, though the reason for that will become clearer later on. In any case, because of this acquisition of language and knowledge, it is like the whole world is opened up for the creature, even as spring, the season of rebirth, arrives. As he explains to Victor, happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which so short a time before was bleak, damp, and unwholesome. My spirits were elevated by the enchanting appearance of nature. The past was blotted from my memory, the present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and anticipations of joy. It's important to note how even now we are seeing Shelley's belief that the natural world is the true marvel of creation, and it's also important to see how both the creature and Victor find peace within it, clearly showing the parallels between them. Just like any parent and child, the similarities seem almost built into their genetics. By doing this, it would seem that Shelley is highlighting the importance of their upbringing, as we start to truly see where they diverge from each other. Chapter 13 begins with the arrival of Felix's love, Safi, and the creature takes the opportunity to refine his language skills even as she learns as well. This includes the ability to read, which again echoes Victor's own self-education with whatever books he had at hand. This of course means that, like Victor, he picks up some questionable information, such as the xenophobic interpretations of some cultures, but it is interesting to note that, also like Victor, he laments the genocide of the indigenous cultures of North America. This education also stirs philosophical thoughts within the creature, further cementing that he is not just some artificial creation, but human in all but birth, both for good and for ill. As he recalls, these wonderful narrations inspired me with strange feelings. Was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? These are pretty heavy questions, and the paradox is something that we still struggle with, and probably always will. From a structural point of view, we continue to see why Shelley perhaps has formed this next layer of narration. Victor's story deals with the ethics of such questions, whereas the creature's deals with them directly. Like I said earlier, Shelley is both narrowing her thematic focus and expanding it at the same time. And if you're frustrated and confused by it, well, then you're understanding what the creature is going through, which is probably the point. Even as the creature learns these questions, he also learns about the constructs that separate humans, namely the ideas of wealth and lineage. Now, it's tough for us to say that we don't know better than to judge people on these things, because we most certainly do. And the creature picks up on this very quickly, and adds that to the list of reasons why he remains excluded from everyone else. Thematically, this is showing that the only reason that the creature seems to be shunned, at least initially, has nothing to do with him, but with sad human bias. This of course all leads the creature to the questions that we all ask ourselves at one point. Where did I come from? Who are my people? Where do I belong? Questions that, sadly, not all of us ever fully answer, and for the creature it's even more difficult, as he laments to Victor, "Where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days, no mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses. I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I?" Eventually the creature finds at least some of his answers, which makes him luckier than many, but we've seen where he ends up, a bitter, vengeful murderer. Clearly those answers did not bring him any comfort, and sadly we already know that this happy time with the cottagers will eventually end, though how that happens remains to be seen.